start off by just thanking everybody for coming, and, you know, the format was gonna be, one-on-one, but I don't honestly care. It doesn't matter to me, I'm fine with this. I'll start off by just giving you a little bit of information of what I know to be Plainfield's most current issues are the transit situation. I'll fill you in a little bit on that, and then the MBR, which I just got informed about that, and I did call Senator Summers, sent her the information from Ken DePietro, and we are, you know, advocating for you guys. There's 20, as I understand it, there's 20 districts that are being affected by it. There may be more, but I think it's good that there's that many affected by it, because the more there are, it won't be just us, one voice on this side of the state. So that's a good thing. But we'll see what happens. But we are paying attention to it. We're aware of it. I did send her the information. And then the other issues are more Killingly related. But this one, those are the two that I know of in Plainfield. So if there's any others, you can let me know.
I guess that answers my question.
Well, the MBR, you know, it's complicated, and I don't really understand it that well because I'm not an education person. So I rely on like the Ken DePietros, the Matt Redonts, who are on the Board of Ed to explain those to me, but there was some concession made for the MBR because of the state cuts, and then they later kind of rescinded on some things and kind of are making them penalized for it, as I understand it.
Right, there was a state reduction out of Hartford and the ECS funding to Plainfield as well as many other towns.
Yes.
And as the funding goes, at the end of the year, you end up with a final year spend on your education budget as a town. And the MBR dictates that you're not allowed to spend less the following year than you did the previous year, unless you have a decrease in enrollment, and even then they have a built-in formula that adjusts that total number that you're allowed to reduce the budget. What the superintendent brought to our attention at last month's meeting, or this past month's meeting, was a communication from the State Department of Education saying that the budget number we submitted was in violation of that minimum budget requirement. And apparently, on the formula, there are two numbers that were pointed to. They're telling us that the higher of two numbers is what we should have been budgeting off of, which is a number that assumes those cuts had never been made. So, long story short, they're basing their allocated spending on schools on that allocation number, not what the number of dollars actually given to the district are. That's how we've come to understand it. It's a big mess.
I have another question. I would assume people know when I came here in 1986, and I was a teacher in Plainfield High School for 21 years until 2007. Of course, that 86 was the time when we had the enhancement monies for education, and at that time the casinos had just come into Connecticut, and of course one of the great selling points for having casino gambling in Connecticut was that there was going to be, the revenues were going to go for funding of education. And what I would be interested in is tracing the development whereby I don't know whether those monies at that time went into the general fund and then were parceled out. I assume back at that time there was plenty of money for everybody. What I would like to know now is what was done with those monies? Are they still being completely awarded to education, or disappearing into the general fund? Are they used for the uses of the state to do with as it wants, and some of it is parceled out to education? And as we can see with the present administration, apparently, or to this date in Connecticut, apparently they're going to feed the cities and starve the towns, because the towns seem to have more success with the test scores while the cities don't. So they've been able to, in a politicized way, effectively cut off the people who are not more disposed to think the way they do by denying them monies. And so do you have any knowledge of how much goes from the casinos into the state revenue pot, and how much stays there, and how much is parceled out to all the schools everywhere in systems in Connecticut?
No.
Because I think that would be worth finding out. And
I could imagine if you, I don't know who would even have access to it.
That has to
if
be.
Ann would, but I mean, the closest you could come to finding out how much that specific contribution into the general fund would probably be just extrapolating off whatever the tax return was, or the revenues collected
from the
from the
because
casinos.
I know that Ann's competitor in the last election claimed that she could have gotten more education funding than Ann did. I don't know what the situation is with that, but frankly, there's no reason why people should have to compete for monies that are supposed to be dedicated to education anyway. There's no reason why we should have to compete for them, and why one public servant who's wants to be in, or is in a representative should have to claim that he or she can get more than another representative. That money should be there for all of us. And in a sense, to put it in a negative way, who stole all these monies and why aren't the schools getting them? I think that's a major issue, and it could be also politicized issue, frankly.
Yeah.
Where's our money? Where's the
I would
money
say
we
more
were
on the
promised?
higher education bracket, such as UConn and the state colleges seem to absorb quite a bit of cost from the state. So I would say that's where most of the education money.
But it is,
That's
it is,
always been a big draw for the money, the special needs.
it is
It's always
also to
been-
point out, the cuts that we did suffer as a town in Plainfield occurred when that budget impasse was going on during that stalemate. So a lot of those cuts came at the pen of executive order from Malloy. So there's, to my understanding of the educational cost sharing, you have one general formula that takes, the population size, grand list appreciation, and allocates funding based on that formula, but it's not the only formula
Yes.
that goes into dictating how much town aid a certain district is going to receive for the schools. But these cuts that were made were outside of a normal budget
Yeah,
timeframe.
okay.
So what exactly, or I'll rephrase, what metric was used to determine exactly how much should be reduced out of each district? I'm not certain of myself. I don't know if Ann has
They didn't give us
any
the
idea.
answers to that. So the 2018 budget that came at us had, there were several reasons why I voted against it. But what happens is, I'm not on the budget committee, I'm not on the appropriations committee, so I don't have anything to do with deciding how the money is expended, whether it be ECS or roads and bridges or so on and so forth. But historically, they have put all the money into the general fund. They say, well, it's supposed to be designated for
Yeah,
schools, right?
earmarked,
We have
yeah.
some of the highest gas taxes in the nation,
Yes.
and that gas tax is supposed to go to our roads and
Yes.
bridges, and now we're being faced with, well, that's not enough. So we pay the highest in the country, but that's not enough. And why is it enough? Because they don't spend it on the roads and bridges.
No, I recall when they raised it by 4 cents, what was it, 2014 or 11, 12? And went right into the general fund. I was livid about that. They had absolutely no plans to do anything with that money except to politicize it.
So it's, the lottery money, the casino money, our income tax that got implemented several years ago was supposed to be temporary, now it's permanent. There's historically been promises made that have never been kept. So I have little faith in whatever, comes down the pike at us in terms of where the money's gonna go. But so to get back to the budget and your cuts in Plainfield, the budget itself included cuts to Plainfield, a reshake-up of the ECS formula, which was not decided by me. I'm not on an education committee, but there were several reasons why I voted against that budget, and that was one of them. One of my towns was gonna be hit in a big, big way. And not that wasn't bad enough, but right after that budget, Governor Malloy decided to cut you some more. So, and that, again, had no, I know you brought up my opponent, I had nothing to do with that. I didn't support that in any way, but it's what came down the pike on my watch. And, I am only one vote, and I continue to be a fighter for my district, but I'm one vote. That is one of the problems. When you look at the whole state, you look at these big cities, Bridgeport, New Haven, Hartford, Waterbury, you know, I have 2 towns, other representatives have 10, some of them have 6, others, right, we're 1 vote. You go to Bridgeport or some of these big cities, and they have 5 representatives, 6 representatives. And so they're a stronghold, they hold a lot of votes in those pockets. So we have to fight really hard out here to, you know, have a voice, if you will, on the northeast side of the state. Why we will all say on the other side of the river to be heard. But getting back to what Matt said about, you know, the expenditures and who decided that, it was, you know, put before me. The MBR, a situation that was pointed out to me by, actually I had a constituent who called me. I didn't know anything about it. He called, he was very concerned. I then called Ken DePietro and I said, look, you know, what can I do to help? He sent me everything that he had, and I sent it, you know, to Senator Summers, and we're both aware of it, and we're both working really hard to be sure that there's a voice on our behalf to demonstrate that we had nothing to do with that.
Right.
That was just the cards that were thrown at us, and we kind of had to deal with what we got thrown. So we are advocating for you. The good news is you guys aren't alone. I think with the budget last fall, you were one of a few. This time, there's several districts, over 20 as I understand it, and maybe
Right.
more, that are impacted by that. So that's, you know, in my opinion, that's a good thing. We'll have many more representatives pooling together to kind of have a voice for this situation. So that's all I can tell you. I don't know any more, any less, but we're aware of it.
I know
We're working on it.
The one issue that somewhat overlaps into this is, if it's not able to be resolved, then before July 1st, June 30th, there would need to be $551,000 appropriated out of Plainfield's general fund into the education fund, which is an enormous piece out of a town reserve that is, I think, I might be wrong, maybe 14% of what the operating budget is, which for the state is a pretty healthy figure to be at. Nationwide is already pretty low below average. So that's a huge piece to have to come out of the fund balance for Plainfield in order to abide by the minimum budget requirement formula I'll give Ken credit, you know, when we were going through the budget season on this, he did everything he could to stay on top of it to make sure we were going to be ahead because we understand just what the penalties
Right.
are. And again, if they weren't to appropriate this $500,000, then the penalty is going to be $1.1 million, so they double the impact to the budget, which again would put you below what the previous year's MBR would be established at, so you get caught in this
Right.
vicious circle going down with it. So a big secondary concern is the town fund balance.
I would
as well.
assume that has something to do with the news I've seen that the town selectman, the first selectman wants to increase the fund balance. Did you know that for that fund?
Yep, it actually passed at the last
Oh, good.
Board of Finance meeting. They moved it from, I believe it was the unreserved, reserved or unreserved, because your fund balance is split into the unreserved and reserved portions. One of the two moved from 8 to 10%, requiring a Board of Finance motion to unlock the monies if the time required. So it's prudent. I think I agree with their action, but I mean, it doesn't put more money in there in the short run, especially when you're looking at having to bridge a potential gap like that.
Does anybody else have any questions on that issue? I wish I could give you more information. All I know is that we're aware of it.
I'm just happy you're aware of it.
We're working on it. You know, I did call Ken right away and I said, you know, how can we help? And he sent me all his documents and we forwarded them, so we're trying to stay right on top of it. Again, you know, I don't know where it's gonna go, but I'm hopeful only because there's so many districts, I think, affected by it. So I'm hoping that a good outcome will
Do you
come.
feel with the budget season coming up that this is gonna be an issue that manages to stay somewhat towards the front burner, or?
I don't, I don't know where Ned Lamont has done. He's already starting to kind of pull his team together and do
Mhm.
some things. Some of it's gonna depend on that. We now have a legislature that's 2/3 majority, one party, so they will be making those choices. And you like it or not, that is the reality of what we face. They will be calling the shots. So, I can be a voice for you, but certainly if they want it to go a different way, it's gonna be a hard uphill climb for us. That's all I can say. That is the reality. And even with bills that are favorable to both sides, they often, what happens on both sides of the aisle is that everybody wants credit. They want to beat their chest for what's happening. So if it's not their idea, it doesn't matter how good it is, it may not go through. And that happens on both sides. It's one of the ugly things that goes on. I'm just being honest. That's what goes on. I've seen it. I've watched it the last 2 years. So, you know, I'll keep you informed. I'll let you know what's going on. I'll be honest with you. I always have been. It's just.
There's no good news.
Is there a list?
I don't know. We'll see, you know.
Is there a list of the 20 towns that have been affected by this?
I did not get that, but Ken told me there was over 20 towns affected. It sounds like Ken's pretty proactive. I'm guessing that he probably knows who they are. It sounded like he might even be getting in touch with
I
some of
think he had
them.
reached out to 1 or 2 other districts, so.
Okay. We
I-
have a
I
meeting
can ask him.
tomorrow with all the superintendents, and the legislators are meeting, so I'm sure that's gonna come up. It's gonna be a topic of
If
conversation.
they're just assuming 20 is a good number, given the makeup of the legislature now, I'd assume that there's gonna be some bipartisan representation on
I
the
think
issue.
so too, and I'll find out more tomorrow, just because we have that meeting with the superintendents.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
any other questions specific to that? Okay. Now we can move on to the transportation. I can update you on that. So many of you know that we were hopeful that we would have that implemented on November 2nd, or November 1st, actually. We were told by the Department of Transportation representative that came out that we were a go. They had worked it out. They had made some changes in the system. Kathy Tendridge and the Board of Finance agreed on the allotment of money from Plainfield, and we were ready to go, and I messaged that to the constituents. We're ready to go, it's gonna happen. And soon after that, we got information from the commissioner that the information that was given to us by the representative of the person who came out, it didn't get to the top. So the commissioners seemed to not be fully on board, or I shouldn't say fully on board, he didn't understand exactly what was going on. We had a meeting, and I keep looking at Naomi because she attended the meeting. We went to Hartford and met with the commissioner regarding the transit issue in Plainfield. Heather Summers, our senator, went. I went. The Kathy Tendridge went, your first selectman, and we were all there. And much to our dismay, the commissioner really didn't know all the ins and outs of what was going on. The representative that came out to see us was there, and he was the one that had given us that information. So it turned out that the commissioner was really on board with the plan. The problem with it is that he had not been able to communicate with John Filchek, who is the director of NECOG, and there's still some I's that need to be dotted and some T's that need to be crossed. So in order to push that forward, they need to do those things. So he was hopeful that it'll happen sometime after the first of the year and at the very latest in July. We're hopeful. Now we have a new administration, and we're getting a new, I'm told through the grapevine that we may even get a new transportation commissioner. So I don't know how the new commissioner, how motivated he'll be to let that happen. I'm hoping that he will be. I think it's important, and I think that the message to the Northeast corridor is that it's the missing link in the whole Northeast corridor. So not only does Plainfield have residents that want it, but additionally, every town is affected because it's the missing link. You can't make that connection from Thompson down to New London without having that link filled. I'm very fiscally responsible. I think most people who know me know that I've been a huge advocate for not spending more than we can afford. So initially it was sold to me that they were gonna be able to eliminate some routing and bring it to Plainfield, and it would be no additional cost. That's not quite true. We learned that at that meeting. There's gonna be, and I think most of it though does come from the federal government, not so much.
Well, my understanding from the commissioner was that was one of the issues. Is
Correct.
that the representative, he's fairly new, thought that they could remove routes that weren't being used, that had low ridership, and allocate the money from those routes to Plainfield for the southern end. And there are laws that state you cannot do that, because now you're potentially violating other people's rights to rides in other areas. So when the commissioner found that out, he was like, we can't do it that way, so that was another one of the issues.
So there's certainly gonna be
Came
a
in from the
cost,
southern end,
there's gonna be a cost factor that
right.
was not made clear to me initially. Because I was totally on board when they said, we can take these routes, eliminate these routes that aren't being used, put them in Plainfield, and I thought, well, this is a win-win. It's not gonna cost the taxpayers any more money. We're gonna make it more efficient, right? We're all about, and I think that we need to do that throughout the state. We have different agencies that work and they overlap. They're doing the same job, and we need to make the state much more efficient. We're all in a big financial bind, and we need to make efficiencies happen, and I saw that as one of those opportunities. I don't know what's coming down the pike. I don't know what the cost will be. I don't know what the plan is gonna be that they're coming out with, but they are working on it. They're currently doing an updated survey that apparently the DOT wanted and NECOG put together that asked some more specific questions that weren't in the initial survey. So I put that on my Facebook page. It's been out on the Plainfield residents site, so we're hoping that people will participate in filling that out. They are also having two public hearings, one in Moosup and one in Killingly, and I'm not sure why they're having it in Killingly either, I don't know, but I talked to Mr. Filchuk today.
Where they had it,
I don't know, but as soon as I get the flyer, I will post it and I'll send it to you, as soon as I get it. So you'll have an opportunity to go and talk.
And did he give you a date on that?
He did not. I don't have dates, I don't have times, I don't have places, so I just know. I just know he set up two of them, and he did not have the details for me. I spoke to him about just before, like around 4:30, to get the update for you, because you had sent me a message. So I'm waiting on that, so that's kind of where the transit sits. It was hopeful with the commissioner that's in place. I don't know where that's gonna go. That's all I can say. And you know, Heather and I have advocated for it, because again, I think it goes far beyond Plainfield. I think it's, look, we have all this other money spent in the Northeast Corridor to make transportation viable from Thompson to down to Groton, if you work at at EB, and we have this missing link. So it seems to me that it makes a lot of sense to make that gap and fill that gap so that we can make it a smooth transition going from one end to the other.
That kind of becomes my next question. I mean, when does this start to become a civil rights issue that the town of Plainfield is being restricted from any state funding or federal funding coming in through the DOT for it when all the other towns around us are?
Well, so I would say that now that the Board of Finance has agreed and Plainfield has agreed to put in their part, you can maybe make that argument going forward. But until then, you really couldn't, right? Plainfield wasn't at least on board with putting in their portion of the funding. So up until then, right, it was part of, Plainfield had some responsibility in that they weren't interested. But now that they are,
Right.
going forward, that you might be able to say, you know what, Plainfield's being treated differently than the rest of the town. So perhaps maybe that would be something that you could say.
Well, yeah, I mean, when it
Or
costs,
argue.
when it costs $15 to go 3 miles from UCFS back to Dow Road, we have to do something. I need to be able to get around my town, and I need to be able to get out. Otherwise, I'm going to have to move, and that's not something that I want to do.
You've made some good points, Tammy, and we appreciate those.
Yeah, I try.
You do. You've been a big advocate for it, and we do appreciate
Other
that.
than me driving, I think
Yeah.
that's all I
So we're
can do.
working on it, and I know you're at every meeting, and as soon as I get that information, I'll let you know so you can go to
When
those
automatic
too.
cars come up, I think, 'cause they're.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
And after I run over 10 people, they're
Yeah,
gonna be like, okay,
yeah.
she gotta stop now. Maybe then we'll get transportation. We should do
So,
something.
so what would the plan look like as far as, would it be using the existing transit buses that are going from Brooklyn, Killingly, Thompson, Putnam, Thompson, and bringing them down here, or would it be separate buses
Well,
that connect?
They would make them, NECOG does the northeast quarter and SEAT does the southeast. So it's making them come to some kind of meeting point, and that's part of the routing workout, is how they're gonna make that happen. Where they're gonna meet, where they're gonna transfer from NECOG to SEAT. And so that there's details that hadn't been worked out in the original plan, that weren't as simple as the representative came out and made it sound like. He kind of made it sound like, oh yeah, we'll be up and running. Well, it was a little bit more complicated.
Yeah.
It also wasn't as simple as John Philcheck made it sound either, for that matter.
Yes.
because
It's never as
let's-
simple as
Let's
it-
face it,
I mean,
he
the
didn't-
routing system was done. NECOG has done the
Okay.
routing system. The problem is that Philcheck is a little overzealous in how many routes he wants, going back and forth through, and it would come down actually through Brooklyn into Warri again, then go down through Central Village, moves up, come down into northern and southern Plainfield. And then what they were hopeful for was the switch over at Big Y, where seat would come up to the Big Y location, so that way it gave the residents the opportunity to go north or south. The problem is the seat will not, we can't, the town of Plainfield is not gonna be able to fund both the seat side and NECOG side. So seat's not going to accommodate NECOG with all of these additional routes, because their routes don't even, they don't, so like seat might come at 1, where NECOG would come at 3. So trying to get them to come together is gonna be pretty complex. So the routing system has been put in place on the northern side. Seat was very brand new coming to the table, which Heather really was trying to work with the new representative, because that's been completely never addressed.
Well, and I think too, that it was overzealous in that we don't know what the ridership's gonna be yet. So once they get it in place, I think if there's a demand on the ridership, then hence
Hence the funding.
the funding will follow. But
Correct.
at this point in time, they weren't really confident that there was the ridership, so they wanted to do a few routes and start there and then
Right.
expand on that, based on the demands on the ridership. That's how I understood it. And like I said, Naomi came too, so it was good to have a second pair of ears, because we both talked about it all the way home, what we heard, what we understood, and what the plan was.
The biggest thing now is getting the surveys out as much as.
Well, and the other thing was too, is where the commissioner was hopeful, I mean, I felt he was very responsive to wanting to
Yeah.
support it.
He did.
Was that Philcheck was using the survey from 2016, so it was all old data.
Mhm.
So like he said, well, if the needs of the town have progressed and there's more ridership, that could help us to get more federal money.
Correct.
So that's why the commissioner asked for a
New
updated-
survey, and then the
Yeah.
public hearings apparently were supposed to have been done prior to, and those had never been mentioned, so.
No, they hadn't.
Right, so that's something that had to be done too, which I was unaware of.
Right.
So now we know, and those are in progress, so we're moving in that direction. I mean, I feel hopeful that it's gonna happen, although, again, I mean, you know, the state is in big financial trouble, so I don't know how that's gonna all shake out. I don't know how the administration's gonna see this. I mean, they're looking for ways to get more revenue, but I've been a huge advocate that people cannot afford more money to put more money in, and
To
so.
me, I think what was ludicrous is the fact, Anne, that there's a law that actually states, okay, so we're gonna pay, you know, in our tax dollars for these routes in towns where there's no ridership, or very low ridership, or parts of the city that are nowhere routes. But we can't take that money from those routes, we can't disembowelish, we can't get rid of them, and then take that money and put them where they're needed. Oh, there's a law, because then we're potentially, whose rights are you violating if no one is using the bus system? So
Well-
that, to me, was just a ludicrous, that the law is actually working against us like
Well, the
that.
other thing too is Stonington says they're done with theirs. Simmons don't want it no more, so there's that extra revenue. Why can't people use their heads and say, we'll just take that revenue and move it, instead of taking it back? Yeah, it's easy, they don't want it. And it'd be nice to see probably push this forward before the commissioner and not gamble on the roll of the dice, just try to get him to sign it
Well, yeah,
off
that's why I wanted to know.
before they change.
And-
If he's proactive, that would be like pushing,
Like Philcheck saying, he set
push
it
this
up.
through and get it signed.
Now, I realize this is a work in progress, but is the plan, once you expand to Plainfield, would there be another bus added, or would because right now, for example, the bus stop on Main Street in
Yeah.
Danielson, it's pretty much once per hour that the pickup happens. If that bus were to come down this way and make that bigger loop, obviously with the same number of buses, that would have to be, the pickup time would have to be expanded, so maybe an hour and a quarter, an hour and a half, whatever. Is that the plan to do it that way, or add a
I
bus?
think there's a couple of different plans going around. I think it's gonna be financially what's feasible. I mean, I think they have the capacity to put another bus or two on the road.
Right. They
But I
do.
think they don't, how it's gonna play out financially is the big thing. So it may not be impacted at all, it may be for a little while, I don't know. Again, that's what they're working through, those are the details that hadn't been worked through, that were a little bit more complicated than they threw on the table when they first said, oh yeah, we'll be up and running by November 1st, which wasn't just that simple.
So maybe on the onset, just go bare bones with it, just to get it up and running.
Well, and I think that's the idea, let's get it going, and then see what the ridership demand is, and when people start calling up and saying, oh, I was at blah, 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 and I was waiting here, and I could use a ride here, then you'll see, you might see that pick up a bit. But right now, there's nothing, so let's
Right.
get it in place and get it going.
Right, we go
Make the
bare bones,
connection.
it's an easier plan, and it'd be
Well, and I
faster to
think,
get up there and
I
sign.
think too, if you get people from the north and the south who need to go through this hole, as I describe it, where there's nothing, outsiders will be making demands too.
Well, that's the thing.
So that may change it too.
It just
So-
doesn't count ridership in
Right.
Plainfield, you have an expansive
Right,
ridership.
right now, we're asking Plainfield to do a survey, but once we get it up and running, it may be that more people will say, hey, you know what, I would benefit by getting from
Right.
here to
We
here.
don't
and
even know what the
let's-
ridership would be for
Mhm.
bumps from Plainfield all the way
Right.
to Casino.
Right. Is there any other questions? I know we had some new people around. Do you have any questions?
Are we still on this topic?
We can be. Would you
Oh,
like
no,
to?
I just wondered
Yeah.
whether you're saying, are we going to a different topic or something?
We can stay on this topic, and I'm just saying, is there any other questions on this topic? Because for sure, Okay, we can go to any topic you want to.
Till you figure out more.
I don't, does anyone else have something important to say? Because mine isn't so. As some people know who know me, I've been concerned about the spending that's out of control in the state. And one of the problems is, as I see it, the earned income tax credit for Connecticut residents, that a lot of people aware of what that is. In about 2011, there was a new, basically what it is a social benefit, an entitlement which was co-sponsored by May Flexer, which many people don't know, as the House representative, and by Martin Looney, the senator from New Haven, who is now the president pro tem. It was called an earned income tax credit. What it does is it gives money, cash money, out to people in Connecticut who file state tax income tax forms, who are of low income or no income, who have some income from working here in Connecticut. Of course, it has a lot to do with whether the filer has children or not. So basically, it's free cash back to people who paid very little or no taxes. The first year, it was estimated that this benefit, the earned income tax credit, would cost $98 million. However, it went up over $120 million. And I would assume it's gone up every year since. Now, the people who do collect these Connecticut cash benefits also receive a federal benefit, which is far more. And the Connecticut benefit is based on their federal tax form. So by my estimate now, probably I think the tax year 2011 is when it began, over $1 billion has been spewed out in free cash money. And I don't think it's going to stop. And it's killing us. It does, of course, benefit low-income people. But it is another entitlement that is costing this state a lot of money. And actually, Christine did send me the figures on it once, but at the time, for each year, I was interested in getting them when she was the representative, but I didn't have at that time a Word program in my mail that could open the documents, so I actually never saw them. But anyway, it's really something that concerns me. It must be between $120, $150 million a year, easy, because these things only go up, they don't go down, as more people become aware of them. Also, earned income tax credits on the federal level are a huge means for criminals to get large amounts of money. You can take out 50 P.O. boxes and submit bogus federal tax forms with children on them, and you immediately get tax money back, because the federal government must pay out the money to you first, without determining whether it's a true or real or genuine tax return application or not. So this thing has been horribly abused. If you go on to earned income tax credit on Wikipedia, you can read about these things. But we have our own now in Connecticut, so I'll stop there. I would like to find out how much it's paid out.
I'll find out for you, Mike, and I'll call you. I do know that the budget that was put out initially last year that was the bipartisan budget they were trying to work on, lowered that level.
I have read it would be lower.
And that was not, both parties did not agree on that. That was only one party that wanted that to be lower. So they ended up keeping it the same. So there was some appetite to make that different, but it didn't pass.
Yes, I'm sure that one party in particular would like to see it continued.
So. Any questions?
I have a question, but I wanted to talk to you in private about it. But I also, on the same order, I used to sit on the housing, well, I was the housing commissioner in the town of Plainfield for over 15 years. What really galled me is the renter's rebate that they do. And I don't know if it's state money or federal money at the moment, but they have the people that pay rent, like at Sunny Acres, it's based on their income. They're paying probably $333, $350 a month for rent. And then at the end of the year, come October, they have to bring all their receipts of what they paid for the past 12 months in rent, and then they get a renter's rebate check of $700 to $900. And that's everybody. You know, and it's like people that live in their own private homes that are struggling, they get nothing. But somebody that's already getting assisted rental, you know, income, in low subsidized rental, I mean, where do you get an apartment for $333 in town? And then they get a check for $700 to $900 back at the end of the year. I mean, that's kind of strange,
Yeah.
but that goes on every year.
And that does not go over to vouchers, Section 8 vouchers, anything like that. That's something that they do with I believe, the elderly. I'm
Should be
assuming.
elderly and disabled. Disabled and elderly.
Yeah, well, disabled don't get that unless they're dealing with it in a subsidized housing type complex.
No,
No, you're eligible for that.
You're
Yeah,
eligible.
yeah. Never got it.
So you have to apply for it.
Yeah,
You have to apply
you can
for
come
it.
here, they do it, they figure it here or down the town hall, they have
Yeah.
somebody that will help you
Yeah,
with
no,
it.
it's,
But I
you're
believe
eligible,
it's state
Debbie.
monies that come back in.
I don't know.
I think it's state money because I read that.
It was started, it was
late
to buy
last year,
votes
and I
years
remember in
ago.
Bridgeport, and that all the elderly were complaining because they didn't get their checks, and they didn't get them like January.
Oh, yeah. no,
I think some of
yeah.
those are state with some subsidy from the
Yeah.
federal government, and I don't know about that one in particular, but that's what happens a lot.
Yeah.
You know, sort of like.
Stuff snowballs.
Exactly, and they'll give you some federal money that subsidizes the state money, which comes into play. Do you have any questions?
I have a question, but the question is, I don't know if everyone here knows that we're going into a grand solar minimum. This is a 200-year event, every 400 years. It's a major cooling cycle, and the sun has already changed. And there's going to be all kinds of things happening as a result of this. And I'm wondering if the state, have they put anything together to look at this? I can leave you just a couple of things. There's one website per kind of problem we're going to be facing. But
Okay. So you said, did I write that right?
Grand
Grand
solar.
solar?
Grand solar minimum.
Okay. Grand solar what?
grand solar minimum.
Minimum.
And this
I
has
wrote
to do
cycle.
with earthquakes, which are already happening around the world, volcanoes going off, which is already happening, crop losses. Canada, just in the last week or two, they lost most of their potato crop. They were getting ready to harvest their grain crops, and they had 6 or 8 inches of snow on the beginning of the week, 6 to 8 inches of snow at the end of the week, and then they got another 12 inches the following week. And they were harvesting their grain and the snow at the same time because they had a couple of foot of snow. But this is going to impact a lot of things. In a worst case scenario, the first one that's on this one here, that's John L. Casey. He put together a team of geologists from various countries in the world. They're all experts. They did a 10-year study of the earthquakes throughout history, and this pattern, we've already entered the beginning of this pattern. But the concern for New England is that most of our natural gas is coming up through pipelines. You remember 20, 30 years ago, we had all the refineries on the coast, and we had all the big tank farms and everything. That all went away, and we're getting most of our fuel coming up from the Gulf of Mexico, and it's coming up through pipelines that go right through.
Where the potential earthquake, is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's the New Madrid area. That's where the biggest earthquake we had was New Madrid back in the 1800s. But for that to happen today, that's going to knock out much of the petroleum supplies, including natural gas, and a lot of the electric high voltage transmission line. His book, Upheaval, goes into a lot of this stuff. That's a 1-hour program. The first one's a 1-hour program that covers the earthquake part of it. But John L. Casey sent a letter to Obama, I think it was 2 years before Obama was out of office, warning him that FEMA needs to get off the butts and realize that with what's coming over the next 20 or 30 years, it's not going to be if a problem happens in Westerly, they call on Plainfield to come help them out. It's going to be when something happens in Westerly, it's hit Connecticut, it's hit Massachusetts, it hits other states. So this is really big. It did a lot of destruction to the world in the past. It collapsed civilizations in the past. One of them that's on there is the collapse of the Bronze Age back in 1177. It's a history professor's presentation. And it's fascinating because when he gets to the end of that, he looks at how our economy is in the world today. And he shows the points of the way it got specialized and how we are today. It says we are in the exact same boat. You know, like right now, Trump is going head to head with Iran, and some date, I think it's December 16th, he's already put sanctions on Iran, and Iran says if you do that, we're going to war. And Iran already has, the Muslim countries already have permission to use nuclear weapons on the United States. In addition to that, both Iran and North Korea have 2 satellites that circulate the Earth on a polar orbit, which means they're not picked up on any of our early warning. So that was an issue here about 2 or 3 years ago, and I don't know exactly what's happened since. They initially put one of the missile cruises down off of South America to kind of monitor. I don't know if it's still happening. But these are all events. In the past, when these things happened, half of the population of the areas that were affected died. And a special one for women is a woman in Connecticut that's done studies about the women being, this one here. Oh, this, you don't have, yeah, that's not the last one. I've got another update since then. But she's done a study of the witches. If you remember New Hampshire, the witches and stuff. But what they did is when people were starving, and during these periods, there's mass starvation. And during these periods, what they do is they pick out the weakest, which happens to be women, so they call them witches. And there's a pope called Pope the Innocent, who actually went out when they were raiding and they were getting close to where his residence was. They said, no, the women are witches, go burn them at the stake. So this was accompanied by great big charcoal bonfires and stuff, where that was, the women became the food for society until very few women left in some of these areas. So I'm not suggesting you all get a pistol permit, but if this repeats, I'd like to qualify this, if this repeats, it will be a major thing that will go on 20 to 30 years. There are other scientists that think this is a much bigger cycle event, that it may go on 100 years or it may go on even longer. But keep in mind, this is the first time period where we have all these scientific instruments, we have satellites in space to monitor all this, and we're seeing it. there's a section here on cosmic. This, what we cover here is the grand solar minimum. This is on the earthquakes. This goes down and it's, I think it's back to John L. Casey earthquakes and so on. You get into here on Dutch Sense is a geologist, he forecasts earthquakes. Our government says you can't forecast earthquakes. It runs about 80–85%. On the Indonesian ones and those others, he forecasted them, and there was a big battle within their government where they announced it, then they took it back, then they announced it, took it back. But cosmic rays, this is significant because the government learned this in 1998. In 1998, scientists were asked, all the satellites had gone out in the plane of the solar system, so we could see what was going on with the stars and moons and stuff. They said, hey, what's above us and what's below us? So the European Space Agency and the US scientists designed a satellite, and they both went and built it, and we beat them by about a couple of months. So we put our satellite up. To get it to go up and around, it's a Ulysses satellite that went up in 1998. They shot it under Jupiter and used the gravitational pull to drive it way up and then bring it back down under. And the government knew at that time the cosmic rays were going up. And if you go on spaceweather.com, anybody here flying airplanes, do any traveling as part of their jobs or their life? Well, if you don't, you might want to go on spaceweather.com and look at the radiation levels that these planes are flying through today. It's, if you're up at 45, 47,000 feet or so, in that range, it's 70 times what the ground level radiation is. And our government is getting very concerned about this. So the question I had is, where's all this coming from, you know? So I start doing my internet searches and search here, search there. What we think it's coming from now is a place called Eta Carina. It's 10,000 light years away from the Earth. And some scientists developed a satellite that could measure this. It's a small satellite too. And the NASA put it up, and they used it to kind of scan where the stuff was coming from. And they've got history of back in the 1800s when there was a massive explosion there. Apparently, if this is correct, and that's what the science is saying today, is that two stars are tearing each other apart, and that's creating this massive amount of energy. So think about this for a minute, 10,000 light years. If you're in this room, take a table right here, okay? If you're right here and there's a star here, you've got a circle with all this energy coming out. You double the distance, you get 1/4 the dose, okay? So every time you go out, it's 1/4 less. And this is going on for 10,000 light years. This is a massive amount of energy. And I don't think it's that. I thought I grabbed the latest copy, but I guess I didn't. But this is fascinating. I've talked to some scientists on it. My son's studying now to be a historian, so I took him to Bangor, Wales. That's where he's going to university there. We stopped in Iceland, and I talked to TSA people and see if they knew about the grand solar minimum. TSA, but the security doesn't know anything about it. At the airports, they didn't. We went to museums. Everywhere I went, talked to a few college professors, talked to some firemen, because this causes massive fires. And you think of it today, if electric power goes down, what happens? This also is related to the sun, and National Academy of Sciences about 10, 15 years ago, they did a major study on solar, that the sun goes through peak cycles, and they were worried about the active cycles, and then it goes through these cold periods, which is what we're entering now. And there's major explosions on the sun. Right now, the northern half of the sun, the normal sinusoidal flow of energy that runs through that is not normal. It's all disrupted, it's all chaotic. And the sun is actually slowly losing energy.
But I don't think the state's gonna help in that situation. We can't even get a bus to go through town. Why are they gonna dump money into this project?
This is the problem. When you talk to people in the federal government, or I talk to people overseas, it's too big to handle.
Well, it also is against the global warming meme, so they don't want to hear it.
Except for the fact that if you look at the science and you look at the history, the global warming was a normal warm cycle. The sun goes like this, and it goes like this over thousands of years, and there's bigger cycles. And so it was a normal period. There was a normal warm point. And, by the way, there isn't, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of Pierce Corbin, he's an astrophysicist. He predicts weather 6 months in advance, and he does a pretty good job of it. He just came out with a short one on iceagenow.info. If you
Dan's
have-
trying to keep a lid on the expenses right here on the table to help
Well,
with
you
that
haven't seen
situation.
anything on expenses yet. Let's take a look at it. The government is totally bankrupt. They're talking about changing the money system. They're talking about a lot of things. They're pushing for war now because the Depression got us out of the war, and unfortunately, some of the extremists in the Republican Party are saying, let's start a war now, have the war into the recovery. And I'm an ex-Army officer, and I'm saying, no, we shouldn't be thinking that way. But we're facing one of the biggest,
Well, I think there are extremists in the other party that feel the same.
there's a lot of people.
It's not just the Republicans.
No, the point, that's true. But all I'm saying is this, is there are solutions to the problems. No matter how big the problem is, you can work out solutions within your towns, food supply. Keep in mind right now, grain is not traveling from the grain growing areas of the United States to the other regions. There's a breakdown in the system on the Mississippi River. And I haven't got all the details on that yet, but apparently what's happening is it's flowing very rapidly in the northern part of the Mississippi, and as it goes down, a lot of that water is disappearing into the ground, is what they think. They're actually talking now about dredging, they are dredging some parts of the southern Mississippi to try to get irrigation. But the point here is that my feeling on this, having been in the Army and having worked in looking to the future as part of my career, I worked in defense contractor, we were always looking to the future, is that look at history and see what happens. And you'll be pretty sure it's gonna happen again. So yes, there are things we can do. Possibly the G5 system that's coming out will be a big help, because that works like amateur radio. Amateur radio, you have a radio, I have a radio, we can communicate anywhere, and the G5 works that way, and if a system breaks down, it just goes and finds another route. So, you know, the government and industry is working on it, and Trump just told AT&T and another company, get off your butts, we want it now, not 6 months from now, or a year from now. But all this information is out there, just if you look at grant solar minimum, you'll hit some of these things, and you'll see it. And the question I've got, if you know there's a problem, okay, the state doesn't have money to do a lot of things. You've got a heck of a lot of retirement people here that have worked on every kind of conceivable problem. And a lot of our problems in the past have been solved. There are ways to do it.
Well, thanks for the information.
Yeah, so
Very
just,
interesting.
and but the state, you're with the state now, right?
Mhm.
So the state could get volunteer groups in the towns, get retired people and some of the people with science backgrounds, some of the farmers, get them together, talk about this, and work out plans, because what we would need to do is try to get our farming industry up a little bit more here. Instead of growing grass, we might want to grow fruits and vegetables, you know.
We
But the-
already have, we have an agriculture.
But my question would be, if this is, okay, like major earthquakes and stuff, we have fault lines right here running through town. We've had earthquakes in the town of Plainfield.
Only small ones so far.
Right, so how will that be affected if something on this grand of a scale was, like,
Well,
how are those fault lines
Okay,
gonna be
I
affected?
can just give you an opinion from reading now, because I'm not a geologist. It's been a hobby for years for me, but I think the areas they're warning about most is the New Madrid, because we've gone to natural gas. Before that, we had coal, and we had a lot more nuclear energy. Okay, nuclear power plant runs until it has to refuel. So as long as you got a little diesel fuel for the generators for emergency use, you can run a reactor for 8, 10 years, whatever the fuel load is. If you've got coal, you can take and have a pile of coal 100 foot high and bigger than a city block. And that's the way it was in the ammunition plant I was stationed at in the 1960s. We had enough coal to last us for a year. You can stockpile that, and you can just
May I
run
interrupt, sir? Ann is scheduled to be here till 7:30. There may be
Okay, so-
other issues we want to
Yeah, okay,
consider.
so anyway, I just thought I wanted to bring it up, just let you know, but if the state could just take the lead in getting the towns to kind of get volunteer groups together, they could start working on these problems, and possibly even getting FEMA involved in a system like we had certainly had at one time, where FEMA would take the lead on bringing up independence, you know, getting the towns.
You
Yeah,
can
I
have
can-
Kathy Tender done that, right?
Mhm.
That'd be a good thing to do, to bring up with Kathy.
Well, thank you, I appreciate it. Sir, I know you had spoken.
Driver.
Okay, all right. I don't know what, oh, it is 7:25.
And we may need those buses.
Yeah.
And I know it was set up to be individual, but it just, you know, everybody was here, we were all just sitting and talking, so I'm happy to sit and talk with you after, not a problem, but it was the first time I've ever done or advertised it that way. In the past, I've just done town halls where they're open and anybody can stand up and say what they want. Sometimes I do them with Senator Summers and the other representative from the other part of Plainfield. This time, everybody's so busy, but the session's starting next month, and I wanted to give people an opportunity to come out and talk and ask a question, or if there was a particular, some issue I could work on and make a bill about. I do have a list of bills I'll be submitting. I don't know how far they'll go. I did it last time, and, you know, when I'm asking to decrease taxes, it doesn't usually go over very well, so. But I will continue to work in that vein and look in that direction.
Has Connecticut ever thought about using a section of the Constitution that allows the state to have a silver or gold currency? Because there's a major process going on now.
Well, some of these issues are pretty big, and so I think they're so focused on a microcosm level right now because we're in such financial trouble, and perhaps those, I know, I'm not saying that they wouldn't help, but, you know, you're talking about moving some big mountains up there in terms of getting a voice and getting heard, so.
It's hard to think about steak when you don't have money for a hamburger.
Right. Exactly.
I do know something that I had personally talked to Heather about, and has been brought up with just on the Plainfield residence page, was how now at the DMV, when you fill out any form there, and if you don't mark the box saying that you're a registered voter, they will automatically change you to unaffiliated, so you're not able to vote the
That's not
primaries.
true.
That is true.
That is not true, ma'am. I worked there. I'm the one that takes the information from you.
No, the state of Connecticut does it now with the new DMV, with their new software.
Right.
It's happened to numerous people.
Yeah, that's what I do.
It happened to a lot, it is
Do
true
you work
now.
at the DMV? Oh, I actually have, she's actually right though, I have gotten probably half a dozen calls from people who have been really upset that their registration has been changed.
Unaffiliated.
Yeah, and,
Maybe it's an error on the clerk
and-
that's doing it, but
and-
that's not what we do.
well, we're not really
Yeah,
sure.
we ask if you are a registered voter. If you say yes, you know, we just leave it alone, you know.
Right,
There's
if you
been-
say yes, it's okay. If you don't check it off or press no, then you're automatically changed to unaffiliated. And that has been,
Is it,
the town of Plainfield even said that happens as well. I can't remember who's.
The only way we change you unaffiliated is the first question, you say you want to register to vote, you say yes. That's the only way we would change you to unaffiliated. We have to go through 2 questions, so somebody is apparently not doing
I've
it
actually had a few
correctly.
people call me, so
Yeah.
there's been some issues,
Yeah.
but.
It's happened numerous
Yeah.
times. Even when I was at the poll, 3 people in front of me couldn't vote the primaries because they were changed, and they've been Republicans for over
One of
25 years.
One of the problems is that the people that brought it to my attention couldn't remember who took the information from them at the DMV to actually, if you will, interview them and ask them what happened in that process, so.
Because once you do your renewal of your license, that's the next question. Are you
Yeah.
a registered voter, yes or no? Would you like to be a registered voter, yes or no? So if they click the wrong button, I would imagine, yes, you get changed.
I see with all the ways you can register, why do you have to do it through the DMV?
Well, these people aren't even checking any boxes.
is it
the ones
possible
that I know.
that, is it possible that when they're checking no, or they're not checking?
I'm just stopping.
They're not checking anything.
Right,
Do
is
you
it
work at the one
possible
in
that when
Putnam?
they're doing that, it's a
Putnam
computer
and
glitch?
Wilmette.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. But we give you a piece of paper and you're signing it. You're the one that's signing what we've, you know, checked.
Asked you.
I know that's what the gentleman in
Do you feel that the
Plainfield was-
DMV actively encourages non-American citizens to register to vote?
We can't register a non-American citizen.
But I don't
We
think
have
that
to run them
question.
through a SAVE program through the immigration, and they're not eligible to vote.
Oh,
If they're-
really? I wasn't
Yeah,
aware of that.
Yeah. If they're not a citizen, we have to go through immigration with all their documents, and that's on their license. They're not eligible to vote, because they're not a US citizen.
But they're not asked that at the DMV, are they? They're not asked whether they're citizens or not.
well, we ask if they want to register to vote, and then the machine with their credentials in the system tells us that they're not
We'll
a
tell you.
US citizen. Yeah.
It's interesting, I was not
Yeah.
aware of that.
But so I think there's some people that are grandfathered in, like say my dad's generation, that was not
Yeah,
asked
yeah,
back then,
yeah.
so you have no way of knowing on some of the other people.
Charlie, did you have a question? Anybody else? I don't want to keep anybody here later, and I know that you wanted to ask me a question, so anybody else? Well, thank you for coming. I have cards I can leave up here. Most of you have my number. I do give my cell phone number out, and I do make myself as available as I can. I try to go to as many events as I can and put myself out there, so
Amazing.
if you guys have questions, you can ask me, and I'm share anybody who doesn't have my card, please come up and get it. But I put.
I don't think I have yours.
Okay.
So
But my cell phone is on this card, if anybody wants it, please feel free to take it. I think everybody else has it. But thank you for coming, and I will be doing, I'm gonna try to do one every quarter, that's my goal. May not happen, but that's my goal. The last session, I think I did one on an average of every 6 months in the 2 towns, but I'm gonna try to up that a little bit, and make myself available. I'm on Facebook, you have my cell phone number, you can call my office, you can see me at events. I try to go to all the events that your town has, so please feel free to call me or come up to me anytime and ask me a question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming.
I've always found